I'd now like to call John Firth, who's with Acclimatise, who's going to look at the role of the private sector in climate services and try and give us, add to the picture we've just had. And I'm just going
top one. Very top.
Very top.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Roger, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm coming at this, as Roger said, from a slightly different perspective. I think to perhaps explain what I do, just referring back to Patrick's 50 Shades diagram, which it will ever be known as from now on. We're in that sort of middle box in the translation, broker and impact modelling area. And so we sit on the interface between users and the more traditional academic Met Service, climate service world. Acclimatise is a private sector for-profit company. We're a consultancy. We're a digital application company. We build online applications for our clients, and we're a communications company. We only deal with adaptation and resilience, nothing else. Inevitably that crosses boundaries into things like wider sustainability, disaster risk management, things like that. We've operated now in just under 60 countries in the world. We do public and private, we do developed, all over the world, as I say. We do everything from national adaptation planning countries all the way through to corporate risk management, financial services management, helping companies and organisations secure finance for their projects, so all sorts of things. I'm going to just do half a dozen slides or so, but I'm going to pick out a couple of themes, and I think they're themes in the context of where JPI Climate goes, and perhaps our interest in potential collaboration. And one is that one of the themes is that what we see is not necessarily a demand for climate data. What we see is a demand for interpretation and understanding, and that this is that translation box. There are very, very few clients out there, users, either public or private, who actually want climate modelling data. Very, very few. Perhaps some of the water companies, perhaps some of the engineering energy companies, perhaps some who are focused on agriculture, but very, very few. Most of them want to understand what does it mean in the context of the organisation I represent and work on. The second thing I think is that, and it's been mentioned before, that climate data is an input. It's not an output. It's an input into something else. And it's an input that's added to other data, and then analysis is done, and then there's interpretation, and then there are decisions. So it's part of a much bigger supply chain of data and knowledge. And one of the things I'm going to pick up on that as one of the key inputs, and actually we're faced with a challenge now because the pace of climate services and climate data has been so intense, it's actually outstripped the confidence and the availability of data in other socio-economic sectors. So often we have good climate data, but we don't have good other sectoral data, other thematic data to build it together. So we actually have a problem there. And one of the things I want to talk about is thresholds. Oops. Just to give this a context, and this is an infographic we produced in the 2011 Thailand floods, which had a total economic cost of $45 billion around the world, remember that. It wasn't just cost to Thailand itself. And what it illustrates here is lots and lots of figures about nearly 10,000 factories forced to close. Total output in Thailand fell by 35%. 6,000 fewer vehicles produced each day by car plants in Thailand. 45% of the world's computer hard drives were lost in terms of production. A number of major US companies reported losses to the extent that it caused shares to drop, and potentially it's going to lose directors' jobs if they have another Thailand flooding instance and they haven't done anything about it to protect their business. Now, what's interesting when you look at these figures, there is no reference to climate change. Right? Now, we know this is a climate change-driven issue, or potentially, but what it's giving is the sort of information and the interpretation that both the government and the private sector operating this country needs to understand. So it's trying to context the information about future climate projections within what does it mean for my supply chain, what does it mean for my production, what does it mean for my clients and customers. And that's this issue of contexting and interpretation. Another example is just changing the subject and picking up on the city's work is we were asked to build a social vulnerability tool to allow city officials, this was 5 cities in the UK, to map vulnerable residents in relation to their exposure to severe weather events, flooding, heat wave, for example, windstorm. And it was a tool that assisted both at strategic planning and emergency response level, so it had these dual purposes. And when we sat down and worked this out with the user, and that's an important part of our work, we design tools with the user. We don't design the tool and then try and sell it to the user. It's designed with the user, so they're a vital part of the design. That when we looked at various users for this tool, it wasn't just the public sector, it was also the private sector, because a lot of the social and healthcare provision in the UK is actually coming from the private sector increasingly, so either direct or outsourced to them. And when we looked at where all the data was coming, yes, there was climate data in here, particularly in terms of driving flood risk and heat wave, but most of the data, the socioeconomic data we needed to build this index, was coming from a wide variety of other sources. And just to give that example, when you look at break down the definition of vulnerability into exposure, sensitivity and adaptive capacity, the climate data sits in the exposure box. The real challenge was getting the data for the other 2 boxes, because that's what you need. And until you've got those other 2 boxes filled and you pull it together in some form of tool, the exposure data on its own has little meaning. So, I mean, and what that produced was effectively a GIS planning tool with various overlays. I'm sorry, you probably won't be able to read this. Lots of socioeconomic issues. This process can be used for other climate and vulnerability risk issues as well. We've launched this in 5 UK cities, and we're actually talking to the city of New Orleans next week about developing a similar process for them. They saw us give a presentation about this at the World Bank a couple of weeks ago. Just changing the subject now. This is, unfortunately, I can't show you what we've done, right? So we've had to mock this up. Now, we've been working on a major project, a risk screening tool for one of the world's biggest companies, which is an asset company. It's a company that owns large fixed assets that are around for a number of years. And what they wanted was something that enabled them to go in and sort of drill down, not just the site, but drill down to specific assets on that site, like a pump, like a compressor, and start to ask questions about how will that pump or compressor, how will it operate over the next 10, 15, 20 years, the life of that pump, under various climatic conditions. So if ambient air temperature rises, what will the operating performance of the pump be? That's pretty crucial for this organisation, because it makes a decision, it influences a decision on what sort of pump you buy and what are your future operating costs. So we built a tool for them which translated global CNIP5 and Cordex data. We spent a long time working with them, looking at all their assets, working out what their thresholds were, what are their design performance thresholds, at which point they start to fail or performance tails off, because that's what they want to know. Surprisingly, most companies don't have a good handle on this, and it's actually the same for the public sector as well. They'll have some information, but unless they've got really good asset data, they're struggling on this. And what it enables them to do is, at a strategic regional level, they can use default thresholds for all their assets and default confidence levels and compare one region to another. So it means they can start to look at, should I locate a new asset in this region or in another region? And at a technical level, they can drill down to the individual assets themselves and start to understand how those are performing. We think it's pretty exciting. I'd love to show you this, but it's actually commercially sensitive. And I can't even explain who the company is. It's so commercially sensitive because they see this as competitive advantage. Now, this depends on access to public sourced, freely available, good climate data. But this is actually what the user wants, not the data. And this is this summary of thresholds. This came from, which Roger will be familiar with, it came from a report, Climate Adaptation Risk and Certain Decision Making, which UK SIP produced, and my fellow director at Acclimatise, Richenda Connell, is one of the authors. And I always think it's the most important diagram I've ever seen about trying to explain what a changing climate means. And what he's trying to say is that under a stationary climate, where it's been relatively stable, we obviously get extremes. It doesn't matter what parameter you pick, temperature, rainfall. Everything we use, we operate, has some sort of critical threshold over which it will fail, whether it's a flood defence, whether it's heating in our buildings, whether it's health. There's some point at which things fail. And under a future climate, the changing climate, this metric, whatever it represents, temperature, is gradually increasing such that, and I'll press on to the next one, such that, this is our safety margin, our headroom, but in the future, if we don't move that threshold, if we don't do something about adaptation and resilience, our threshold and margin is being squeezed. And we're getting more risk of failure, more operational issues, more costs, more lives lost, more loss of profits. And this is the issue that our clients want to understand. They have access to this data, they're trying to understand this. I'm just going to finish on one last slide now, and that is that what we've begun to see is, and it's nothing to do with climate science as such, but there's a whole new, although climate science is actually adding to it, there's a whole new world out there of incredibly bright people who all they do is understand data. And we've been working with the US government National Climatic Data Centre now for the last year, and we're doing a lot of work on market analysis for them in terms of their services. And when that work is finally published, we can share that with you, but fortunately I can't do that either at the moment. I'm very good at telling you great things, but not telling you what they are. But it's been interesting exploring with the NCDC, or NCEI as they are now. They don't know who uses their data. They don't know what they use it for. You can go onto their site and freely download everything, and you don't have to register whatsoever. So NCDC has no idea who's using their data, which means they have no idea what value it has, which means actually they have a problem convincing the federal government it has value, because they're not capturing this. So we've been trying to help them understand who's using it, particularly in the private sector. But what we noticed was people are beginning to use the data for other reasons, not what you might expect. And they're beginning to see there is value in these massive data sets applied to other data sets, which have this wonderful phrase, big data. And I believe we're going to see an emergent new business coming out of this. Now, this is a slight fudge, but in America, in the US, the biggest single grossing weather app on Apple is called Dark Sky. Has anybody come across it? I've got it on. You can actually get it in the UK as well. Yeah, although it's not as good as the one in the US. What's really exciting about this was built by a group of data nerds, basically, who had no background knowledge in meteorology and climatology. They don't know anything about it at all. They stumbled across data sets sitting on the NCD website and realised, wow, what an enormous opportunity. What can we do with this? And they decided they would build a weather app that can provide you 15 minutes notice of when it's going to rain in your very locality. It has radar data, so on the screens actually you can see the storm coming in across your screen live. It gives you a forecast for the next 7 or 8 days, It tells you during the day which period, which time of the day it will rain, the percentages. The one in the UK is pretty accurate when I compare it to the Met Office's work. The interesting about it, it's more it's more live. It's changing constantly. In the US, as I say, you can be in your different blocks in New York. You will know in 15 minutes' time it will rain on your block compared to somebody else's. These people don't know anything about meteorology, but what they're doing is realising there's value in data for other means. And so I think there's some interesting things out there. So I'm going to finish there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And I hope you saw the difference between the public and the private sector and some of the challenges and the way that they're looking at the problem, again, from the user side, and really understanding that problem and the way that the decisions are being made. Questions? Just one or two quick questions if we have some. And he cannot answer the question who the company was. I'll tell you that right now.
Thank you so much, John. I'm Roger from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Thank you so much for giving this presentation. I have a burning question to ask, and I hope this will. I don't expect you to answer it, but I hope all of us can answer it. There's a lot of talk about creating a market. I have a question. What kind of market do we want to create? Do we want to create a market so that companies like yours proliferate? Someone is a bridging organization. So this would basically mean that we would create scientific information and support for bridging organizations, existing organizations? Or do we want to create a market where there is no demand yet, which is something different? Or do we want to support actors who are not capable of entering that market, poor municipalities in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, which may not be able to afford your services? And those are three completely different services and different markets, actually. And haven't we understood what we mean with market creation at all so far?
Well, it is a difficult question, because I don't think there's a straightforward answer. And it's actually the things you alluded to. It depends where in the world you are as well. I mean, one of the basic problems is access to the climate data is not free around the world. I work in developing countries where the data is not available to other ministries, never mind outside the government, without them paying for it, and they don't have the money, so they don't use it. And the classic case is Kenya, where the Ministry of Arid Lands collects the Met Services data, hands it over to the Meteorological Office, but then the Meteorological Office charges them for doing the analysis to hand it back, so they don't do it. So access to highly good quality, robust, reliable, high confidence level data is absolutely essential. Yes, I mean, my business wouldn't exist if we didn't know there was this wealth of data available. Although a lot of the time we're not actually using data, because what we're doing is explain to people how you do risk management. We're explaining to them the sorts of things they have to start taking into account. So a lot of it's at the government's institutional process issue as well, in addition to the very direct analysis level. Yeah, it is a difficult question. I don't know. I would do it. I'm CEO of a company. We see an incredibly exciting future out there around the world. I mean, we've got an office in India now, in USA, in the Caribbean. We're looking to expand elsewhere. We just see it as an enormous opportune. But we work very, very, very closely with Met Services, with universities around the world. We partner. We pull them into our contracts and subcontracts, so they're earning part of the fees as well.
I'm going to have to move us on. I'm sorry, John, you're with us today and tomorrow?
Yeah.
So could we please do ask questions? We really have to move on. We're falling. That's okay. There has been some, but I would really like to move us on, if I could. Thanks, John.
Okay.